Okay, this is a new episode of By the Numbers League of Legends edition with me, your host Thorin. I'm actually not 100%. The equity in my soul and my integrity is not actually being entirely bought by Alphadraft, but I have sold a minority portion of it where they can make recommendations towards me and they fund my lifestyle, but I still make the majority decisions here, money. I just want to outline that entirely.
So what you're saying is that in the stock of Thorin, even though most of it has been sold, you actually control all of the voting shares right now?
I always maintain at least a 51% share. That's true. You know.
Well, you could have 10% shares, but if you have all the voting shares, then you're golden, man.
That's the key thing. That's the key part there. I mean, actually, as anyone who's ever employed me knows, it actually doesn't matter even if on paper it says you actually own me and can tell me what to do. I pretty much do whatever I want anyway. And after the fact, you have to sort of rationalize that in some sense you had something to do with it or just fire me. Those are the two options at any point in time. So people do that, Monty. Like some of my bosses will actually be like, yeah, actually, I feel like I'm getting the most out of Thor. I sort of like let him do his own thing, you know, and like I let him come with his own project ideas. That's just their own way of like coming to terms with the fact that I just do whatever I want anyway. So, but speaking of someone who has also been employed by a company that is seeing their market share and their controlling interests potentially divided, you know, limited, possibly one day eliminated entirely, much like Riot's equity in their own company. You're my co-host, MonteCristo, on this show. This isn't actually Summon Insights, so I should really save all that good shit for that actual show. This is a show about fantasy esports from Alphadraft, where you can play fantasy esports, and we've got a tournament coming up in like, well, it starts tomorrow, I believe.
Yep.
Or yeah, it starts on the 18th. Right?
What are time zones, really? You know, I have no idea.
I don't know. So, I mean, apparently Riot doesn't either, by the way. The time zones are set out for the All-Star event. So, the tournament that's going to come up is IEM Cologne, and it's actually a tournament where this has been a fixture many years on the calendar. I think the first one for League of Legends in terms of this time of year was the one in Season 2, 2012, but they actually had an event in Cologne previously because they used to have it at Gamescom as well. So it's been a home for IEM. So it's traditional that we have this tournament each year. Though I actually think last year was the one year we didn't have it. Let me think. Yeah, it was just San Jose last year, right? I don't think there was an IEM Cologne.
No, I think there was.
Let's double check.
I'm looking. Yeah, there was.
Yeah, there was. Who won that one? Oh, that was the one that
was CLG
Gambit
and
Gaming.
Gambit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's why I deleted it from my memory, because it was a dog shit tournament. This one, on the other hand, looks actually pretty good field. Like, I have to say, remember when we talked about this, first of all, when the IEM San Jose field came up, I actually thought, like, oh, that's a pretty cool looking field. But the problem was it had that inevitable problem that a lot of IEMs had where people dropped out or people came with rosters that weren't proper rosters. And so it actually diminished how cool the names looked. On the surface, this is a pretty nice event, right, for a third-party tournament.
Well, first off, what I really like about it is that because last year IEM San Jose was on the preseason patch, so that was like the first big tournament that we could actually see with the new system, of course, with Riot changing every year. Now that didn't happen this year, so we did get all-stars on the preseason patch or on the post-update changes. But clearly that's not the most serious or practice tournament. You know, a lot of these guys were on vacation before this or had retired or whatever coming in. So I think this is going to be the first demonstration of actual like team-based strategy around this new patch, which I think is really exciting. And the rosters that have turned out because of everything that was going on in the off season have been really exciting. Obviously, Fnatic, I suppose they haven't technically confirmed Gamsu, Spirit, and Noxiac yet, but
they basically have.
Yeah, I mean, that's Fnatic, basically. To my knowledge, Ever will be playing with the same roster that they played in Kespa Cup with, that they won with.
They had thus far evaded potential banning, apparently, of someone for elo boosting that was being investigated, but apparently that hasn't gone through yet.
Yeah, Keyed, their support player. Not yet. He may in the future, but they haven't lost any of their players yet to other teams because a lot of people were saying, well, Ever won Kespa Cup, so they're going to lose all their players, but there haven't been any announced roster changes, and to my knowledge, Ever has been scrimming with that same roster, so I imagine that that's what we're going to see.
You know what the fun thing is? I wonder if part of the reason why is, obviously everyone wonders, was it a fluke? Well, this is an ideal chance if you're a team waiting to potentially pick someone up, watch them play internationally, then you'll have a really good sense of them before the season.
Right, and watch them play internationally at a tournament that good teams have presumably already practiced for. I mean, Fnatic probably doesn't have that much practice coming in, but I do know that Cloud9 has been really active in scrimming for the last month. I imagine H2K, because they got their roster together pretty early. I don't know what Xiaogu has been doing, but I would assume they've been practicing in China, and Dignitas has been together for a little while now as well. So I think there's a lot to like about this tournament, and I actually think that surprisingly now, most of the time this late in the year when everybody's on vacation or the roster change madness is going in, we actually did get a good crop of teams to see on this new patch. I'm really interested in this tournament.
So, okay, on Alphadraft, they have contests up now for the first day, as is the way they do it. They do day to day. So the first day is going to be Dignitas, Xiaogu, and H2K C9. And first of all, there is actually a Thorin swag jar tournament up there where it's like a $2,000 prize purse or something. I can't remember how much it is to enter. I'll have to have a look, actually. Let's have a look. How much is it to enter? It's $10 to enter. And you get like $300 for first place. So 30 times more than the entry fee. Okay, so anyway, for the rest of the tournament. So day one is, as I said, Dignitas versus Xiaogu. And Dignitas, you have to remember, is one of the few teams that has to have a stand-in because they had to take formerly Jezis, who used to be the mid laner of SK Gaming, who I think's been playing AD carry recently, but now he's actually going to be the support stand-in for Dignitas.
Yeah, he was playing AD carry with Gamers 2, right.
Okay. But he's going to be the stand-in support, actually, for this team.
Yes.
Now, with that said, Monty, I imagine you were already going to predict Xiaogu to win that match.
Yes. I think that especially... Now, what's interesting about Dignitas is that they don't have their support player right now. Who is their support? Oh, Kiwi. But Kiwi Kid apparently has to go to a wedding or something like that. So they're just using... They're using Jezis as a substitute player, but obviously in the LCS, this roster would be illegal because they would have 3 EU players. So it's a little bit different. So I think with the substitution, like it's probably not going to go great for them. Also, I mean, I don't really know anything about Kure and Spitty J. I'm very curious as to see how Team Dignitas is going to do in North America next season. But again, with the roster change, I don't really think this is a good indication of their strength. But I fully expect Xiaogu to just wreck Dignitas. I mean, it's a best of 3 because again, in these kind of best of series, when you're actually playing fantasy esports, like I think this is going to be a 2-0 for Xiaogu. So therefore, H2K versus C9, which is the other game on day one, I think that's likely to go to 3 games, I would say, but it just depends. Obviously, you can go for the safe picks, which is probably Xiaogu, and then move into hedging your bets with like some C9 or H2K players, depending on who you think is going to win that matchup. I don't know. I think both H2K and C9 look like they have really strong rosters on paper. So I think it depends on how well High transitions into the support role, which I don't really know the answer to.
Is there a logic? Like, here's the way I'm trying to think of a way that this could be worth picking players from Xiaogu. So, I mean, it is a best of 3, so they're going to play at least 2 games. There's the factor that since it's a Chinese team that has no international experience, in theory, they might like feel out the first game and not just go super ham from the second one. Also, they are a team fighting team anyway. It's not like they have god laners and everything laning out.
I mean, let's just talk about Xiaogu previously when it comes to fantasy points. They get a lot of kills in their games, and the way that Xiaogu plays is that they're very bloody in team fights. They often lose the early game and so have to come back via team fighting in the mid game. So that creates situations where there are very drawn out games where there are a billion kills because Xiaogu just prioritizes team fighting over and over and over again over objectives. Like their macro play, their shot calling isn't that great, but they are, or have been at least in the past, very good with team fighting. And they haven't made any roster changes, so there's no reason to believe that won't be true. I mean, Swift right here at 7,100, he's the second most expensive jungler. Like, Rush is more expensive, but he's probably going to get a lot of kills. TNT and Swift are probably really good pickups for fantasy in this particular situation, even though TNT is the most expensive AD carry. I really think he's going to have a lot of value.
Of the players in this contest, he's probably, for people who don't know him, because obviously anyone who hasn't watched LPL won't know this player, he's actually probably, bearing in mind he's not that much more expensive than some of the other big carries, he's probably the most guaranteed to do well in this particular day of play, and in terms of the players on his team, he's the star. So I think he's a pretty decent pretty decent gamble, actually. Especially because, like I say, a lot of people won't know him, so they might not pick him, actually.
Yeah, TNT is probably going to get a lot of kills. You also have to consider factors like TNT and TCT. So TCT was formerly known as Moore from LMQ. And TNT, he because they have a substitute player in the bottom lane, like that should increase the value of TNT substantially because you have to think that the synergy just isn't going to be there. Jez is playing out of role is going to be problematic. So I think TNT is a really good selection for fantasy this week, and so is Swift. I think Swift actually has some good value here, especially for this first match. And there's a possibility that just because of the bloody style that QG plays, that even if they 2-0 Dignitas, they may get more points than even a 3-game series from H2K versus Cloud9.
Do you think that... Okay, so Doinby's very expensive as well. Now, in terms of the game, obviously if it goes to a team fight, he can have an impact there. But in theory, the one thing you know about Shifter is he's just going to play super safe. So you would think there wouldn't be that much potential for Doinby to go crazy.
Doinby also has a tendency to play more supportive mid laners at times. Like he could just play Lulu here because they like to play compositions with Lulu and then play around TNT, just like buffing him. So that's a possibility if they get Lulu. I mean, he's also played like weird support champions in the mid lane, like mid Nautilus and stuff like that in the past. Sure, he's got, Victor games and other stuff, but I just don't see this being a fireworks mid lane. I'd rather take Incarnation or Ryu, I think, in this particular scenario if we're talking about day one picks in the mid lane.
Yeah. So the question for the other matchup, obviously, is who do you have winning C9 H2K? Because it's not as clear cut as like there's definitely going to be an obvious winner. Who do you actually think will win this match?
I don't know. I think it's really, really likely that this series goes to 3 games. Just because of the strength of the rosters. I mean, the big changes, of course, H2K sort of picking up Jankos and Vander and then adding Forgiven to their previous players, Odoamne and Ryu. Now, Odoamne does most of the shot calling on H2K, at least he did in the previous iteration of H2K. I think this roster looks super strong on paper, but Cloud9, I think, made some decent upgrades. I think H2K will win this just because, of course, we're talking about Hai trying to transition to a new role, and he probably needs a little bit more time. I think the most exciting thing about this matchup is Rush versus Jankos, like these two really aggressive early game junglers. And I think a lot of the game is going to revolve around those two guys and what plays they can set up early.
Also, I think that if you want to look at just matchups, this is where having someone learning the role of support isn't ideal in a lane with Forgiven. Like there was a video recently, right, where Doublelift was talking about the experience of what it's like to play against Uzi I at the All-Star. Yeah. Well, that what you have to realize is that's what everyone says about Forgiven. Like he just auto-attacks you all the time while you're trying to farm. So if you've never played against that, it's really difficult to adapt to it. You have to learn initially when you can trade, when you can't, because essentially he will just auto-attack until one of you's dead.
Yes, and Forgiven is, he's a lane god. That's what he is. And Vander is a very good mechanical support player. I don't think that Hai is going to be able to match up to Vander, at least right now. So I think C9's hope comes through their shot calling, but I think we can go down position by position. We could say, well, Odoamne has probably got an edge on balls. I would say Jankos and Rush. Maybe Rush has a slight edge. Yep. Incarnation might have a slight edge over Ryu, but pretty much even. But it's that bot lane. Top and bot, I think, are very H2K favored right now. So Forgiven, I mean, we talked about TNT, but Forgiven also, I mean, he's going to be very expensive too at second, but putting Forgiven in as your flex pick might be really, really valuable. Also, Vander's the second cheapest support. I mean, he's cheaper than Hai. I would definitely take Vander over Hai.
I think for this series, it's one where you might want to play both sides. Like, for example, I think taking Incarnation and Forgiven would be a pretty good duo right there. It's almost certain even if they lose, especially if you saw one of the adaptations Incarnation made when Worlds came around was he was a lot better in losing games. He would still do like good damage output. He would still get involved. He wasn't just like getting crapped on like he was in the past when they were losing games. So I think it's pretty likely he'll have a decent performance in this series.
Also, it's a move kind of back to assassin mid laners right now, and Zed is pretty good. So if Incarnation wants to pull out the Zed or something like that, that's some more depth I think that C9 has. So I agree Incarnation's good. He's expensive though, right? Second most expensive mid laner, but there's probably some pretty good value in that pickup. I think Vander is just, I don't know why he's cheaper than Hai here. on day one. That'd be a really excellent choice, I think.
It seems like the obvious one to pick for your support there. Now, in terms of actual team, which team would you pick? Like, should you pick H2K if you think they're going to win, or should you just go with Chaogu's the safe pick? You don't want to do the safe one, right?
I do normally go with a safer pick, but like H2K is cheaper, so I think it just depends on what you've got in your budget. Chaogu is the most expensive, but it's only 300 more than H2K. So if you're really like fiddling with numbers right there, I think that might be kind of the way to go. But again, it just depends on how much you have left over in the budget. So, actually, I made a team right now that is Odoamne, Swift, Incarnation, TNT, Vander, Sneaky. Oops, I picked Sneaky instead of Forgiven. So it's Odoamne, Swift, Incarnation, TNT, Vander, Forgiven, and the Chaogu Reapers, and that is exactly 50,000. It's not bad.
I've got a question for you, okay? When it comes to picking the team, in the Alphadraft system, a turret gets you 1 point, but a dragon gets you 2. Now, in the current meta, isn't it that the people actually are ignoring dragon quite a bit?
Well, the newest patch,
before,
the turrets got buffed again. For a while there, the turrets were super easy to kill, so yes, that's definitely true.
Is there a team that would, in theory, be better at getting dragons, etc.?
I mean, probably Chaogu, just because they'd go in and continuously team fight over those objectives instead of setting up to siege. Now, that's a good point you bring up, because if we remember Cloud9's success at Worlds going 3-0 in that first week, they were setting up with siege-style strategies, right? So that might be a strength of theirs.
So, okay, those are the first yeah?
But the counterplace, the counter pick to that is kind of saying, okay, well, that's true, but laning is super important on this patch because of the minion wave changes and how much you can snowball out of the laning phase. And you have to sort of win lane in order to group like Cloud9 did at Worlds, because if you're constantly just getting your shit pushed in, it's really hard to group as 5 in the mid lane.
So, okay, for those two matchups, we've got Chaogu and H2K winning. Obviously, we're going to have to now predict the next matchup. So the semi-final, the top one would be Fnatic in our world versus Chaogu. Now, if Fnatic plays Chaogu, obviously it's a new Fnatic lineup, and it's a lineup that, in theory, isn't confirmed, but it's almost certain that it's Gamsu, Spirit, Febevan, Reckless, and Noxiac, and Noxiac's a challenger player. Do you think the Fnatic lineup can beat Chaogu? Because obviously Chaogu, a key thing for Chaogu that's good in this sense is that they're actually coming in with their original lineup. They haven't made any changes.
Yep. They still have Hero as the coach. So I don't know the answer to this because I really have no idea how much practice Fnatic has been getting. I've seen that people are theorizing that certain EU solo queue accounts are Gamsu and Spirits. But how much practice they've actually gotten together as a team is sort of a big question mark. So I think this is sort of a 50-50. It's really, really hard to know who would win this matchup, right? I take Febevan over Doinby. I take Spirit over Swift. I think actually Fnatic, player for player, pound for pound, has a pretty good chance of beating Chaogu.
A concern for me, though, is the bot lane. When you consider the strength of the Chaogu AD carry, we don't know how Reckless will react with this new support.
Right, and also the other consideration is that a lot of the shot calling is gone from Fnatic, right? Yellowstar and
essentially all of it
provided a lot of that, and Spirit, I can tell you right now, doesn't really speak English at all. Like, I don't know what Gamsu's English skills are like from being on Dignitas for a year, but it's a big change to go from Rainover, who's basically fluent in English, right, as a jungler and shot calling the early game, to a jungler that really doesn't speak English very well. Now, again, shot calling doesn't have to be great to beat Chaogu. If you can win the laning phase and then get enough of a lead, then you can probably just kill Chaogu, because it's not like you're going up against some sort of strategic macro god of a team. So it's not really necessary to have, I think, the greatest synergy right now, as long as you have good players in the right matchups, right? I don't know. I call this 50-50, really.
In theory, though, as much as that helps Xiaogu to have their original roster, it also means that they're one of the few teams that can be scouted. I mean, there's a lot of games you can go watch them. Admittedly on a different patch, but you can at least get some sense how they're going to play. Whereas if you're Xiaogu, you have no idea how Fnatic's going to play. No one does.
If you're Fnatic, you have no idea how Fnatic's going to play, right?
True.
So that's a bit of a question mark. So I really don't know.
Who are you going to pick to win that one?
Fnatic. But again, it makes me super nervous.
Do you think it'll go 3 games? I mean, obviously, it's
I
hard
hope
to
it
know
will.
this time, but
There's no way to know, really. That's the problem, is that when you're picking, I feel much more confident about my picks in day 1 than I would in day 2.
Would this be a series that you would be picking a bunch of players from? You think this will be bloody?
Oh, yes, I do think it will be bloody again, because of Fnatic having lost some of their shot callers and everything like that. I think it is going to be a bloody game, and I don't think it's going to be a clean finish, because that hasn't been who Xiaogu is a team, and Fnatic just, again, how are they going to figure out their shot calling issues in time? They're going to have a lot to work on, I think.
So here's the thing: if you're going to pick Fnatic players, okay, so Reckless always had very good stats in the past seasons.
Yes.
But
So
here's
did
what's
Ben.
interesting is what do you do for the others? Because there's a number of other options you can go with. Like Spirits of Beast jungler, but for example, in NALCS when Dignitas won, Gamsu used to actually have pretty good stats, actually. So who would you pick?
Yeah, he was Dignitas. When they had Gamsu, I would say he was probably the most standout player on the Dignitas roster from last year. Now, that's not saying a lot considering Dignitas's results, but I don't know what Gamsu can do when he has better teammates too. Because the burden of carrying really isn't going to be on Gamsu here. I mean, he has Febiven and Reckless to help out with that, right?
So who else would you pick, do you think, for Fnatic side?
I take
Gamsu?
Febiven and Reckless. It depends on the prices. Again, we don't have the player salaries up for day 2 yet. But
I anticipate they'll be pretty expensive, the Fnatic players.
yeah, that's what I think too. So, and also, I don't know. I think I'd rather take TNT than Reckless, just because, like you mentioned, the lack of bot lane synergy between Reckless and Noxiac is probably going to be apparent, whereas TNT and TCT have already been playing together for a year.
So in the other matchup, in our world, we would have H2K against Ever. Now, have you actually gone back and watched any of the Ever games yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell people, are there any players on Ever that you'd pick in a fantasy matchup? Who are the best players?
I mean, assuming they're coming through with the roster that they used at Kespa Cup, which I have no reason to believe is not the case. Like, I think Crazy is a really interesting sort of carry top lane player. So I think he might be a good pickup for people, especially since I think that as far as matchups go, whether it's Balls or Odoamne coming into day 2, I think Crazy should have an advantage. I think, yeah, I feel pretty confident in saying that. I do think he's a good up and coming talent, and he's a strong laner. Obviously, there was a lot of hype for Loken and Keed as well coming into that particular match, but I think Keed is kind of a sleeper support pick. But I also think that Ever is going to lose to either H2K or Cloud9.
What makes you say that?
I just don't think, like, I guess I have some inside information just because, like, my team, Renegades, has been in Korea and we've been scrimming against Ever. And I don't think that they've looked as impressive as they did in Kespa Cup. Maybe, you don't know how teams scrim versus how they play in live, but they have not filled me with confidence in that they're going to be a really dominant force at IEM. But I mean, they 2-0'd SKT and they 3-0'd CJ in the finals. So that's impressive, even though CJ and SKT may not have been practicing very hard before the event.
I think if I was going to pick a player from them, I would pick Loken, the AD carry. I think he's probably the best bet to get some good stats, just based on what I saw in the Kesper Cup.
I mean, Crazy really put up good stat lines too. is the thing. Like, he definitely delivered a pretty solid performance, and he just showed so much versatility in terms of his top lane picks. Lissandra's obviously still really strong right now, and that's going to be a major threat for him. We know he can play Fiora. We know he can play Lulu. We know he can play Vladimir and Ryze. So there's a lot of variation. So I think Crazy, just because either against Dota Omni or Balls, like, I think he will outclass them. Whereas I think that if C9 went, yeah, Loken and Key might be good picks again, just because of High's relative inexperience in that position. But then again, Loken and Key going up against Forgiven, so it's another hard lane matchup to go for.
In terms of since you're predicting H2K here, and it sounds like you're reasonably confident they'll win, would you be more edging towards making your picks from the Fnatic Xiaogu match?
I would rather, I think, have some of these H2K players. Like, I think Yonkos and Ryu can sort of show up right here, and so can Forgiven. So those are kind of the way I would lean in terms of H2K versus Ever. Even though H2K is a new roster, Ever's been scrimming for a while, and they had good results at the Kespa Cup. I just don't know if those results are going to translate internationally, right? These guys have never competed internationally before. It's going to be a really new experience for them. They're going to have to deal with the jet lag. They have a coach, but they're still sort of, they don't have the most infrastructure. So I don't know. It's really interesting.
So the interesting thing, I think, as well for day two, and obviously this is something we can't know now, but think about it if you're going to play day two of Alphadraft, is I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Alphadraft price the Ever players. Because in theory, if they're going off the Kesper Cup stats and all that sort of thing, they should probably have to price them quite high. So actually, the HGK players might be favorable.
A lot of kills. I mean, they were getting a lot of points.
You might get some bargains with the H2K players, believe it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, you might. It's definitely true. The Ever players were putting up really crazy stats, like 5-1 and 10 in the finals for Athena, Loka, 6-1 and 9. I mean, they were delivering when it came to fantasy points. Just a lot of kills.
So, okay, obviously there will be no day three on Alphadraft because it's only one match. But who do you actually think will win this tournament? Who is your pick?
H2K.
Just on the basis, like, the potential of the roster is very good.
The potential of the roster is very good, and I think they've had more time to get together and scrim and prepare for this match. I do like Fnatic's roster on paper a lot too, and so I like Cloud9's, but I think H2K and Fnatic both have on paper stronger rosters than Cloud9, and Cloud9 is still dependent basically on high shot calling, which is obviously wonderful and something that is dependable. That's why they're making the decision like they did. They have Bunny on the roster. They could use Bunny, who is just objectively, at this point, almost certainly a better support player, but he doesn't bring the shot calling that High has, right? So they're making that trade-off. But I think at this level of competition, with lane monsters like Forgiven in there, it's going to be really difficult for High on such a short time frame to adjust.
I also suspect, let's be real, even though this is a cool lineup for a tournament, and it is, to me, it's a meaningful third-party tournament, it's also not the end of the world if Cloud9 doesn't do well. It's a decent chance to try High out before having to try him in official LCS games. So I think it's a good test of how he's going to be as a support player and where you'll.
I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see how he does, because I think this is a really good experiment to run. If you're Cloud9, why not try this, really?
Okay. Well, okay, I've got a question for you. In this tournament, just in general, is there someone who would be like a sleeper pick in terms of a player for this tournament, where maybe the people don't know them that much or they wouldn't expect much from them, and they have the chance to shine in this tournament?
I think if Ever does well, again, Crazy and Loken could be insanely valuable picks. Like, if Ever comes through and rolls everybody like they did at Kespa Cup and they deliver a standout performance, then those guys are going to be huge. Because a lot of the Western people who are watching this show may not have watched Kespa Cup or don't know Ever very well, but those guys put up stupid good numbers for fantasy, at the very least. Very impressive individual performances. So they could be valuable to get a lot of points, the AD and top laner from Ever.
And obviously, since we're picking H2K to win, Forgiven's a pretty obvious one to go with every round of the tournament.
Jankos and Vander are also good.
And if Chalgu is to make it far, if you think they're going to make it to the final, probably again TNT every round.
Yeah, yeah. I think with the way, especially because it's so focused on an AD carry meta right now, and Chalgu in the past has shown a willingness to play around TNT as like a big time carry and play a lot of supported champions in order to help him succeed. I think that's a good choice.
Okay. Right. That's the whole tournament run through. I think, I'm not sure, but I think we said, because we did this on the CSGO show, I think we might have a show next week where the aim is just to do like a wrap up of the year and just do like some thoughts or whatever and like fun awards and stuff. What I might do is I might try and do it like the CSGO show. Because on the CSGO show, I still want to do my own personal end of year awards that are like serious ones about the player. So what we might do is, since we do that on Insight and Esports anyway, what we might try and do is do a serious one for that, and we'll do a fun one for the Alphadraft one, and we'll think up like fun categories, you know, like most most overrated player of the year, just stuff that'll be a mixture of salt and some interesting ones as well. So we'll do two separate styles.
That sounds very nice.
Okay, so as usual, we don't have any sort of parting message because, I mean, believe it or not, life is not like a rap record. You don't give shout-outs at the end. You just turn something off and continue with your life. You will see the people again. And actually, here's the thing, Monty. If I was to die before the next episode of Alpha Drafts by the Numbers, I wouldn't particularly want people to scour the episode and look at what my final message was and take that as a manifesto to the world. Not everything I say on these shows should be taken as my philosophy in life. Okay, ESL? Anyway, so on that note, thanks to Alphadraft for sponsoring the show and giving us money. And they give us money and we play on Alphadraft. You can play on Alphadraft and they might give you money if you win. So as long as the American government doesn't ruin all my dreams. So in light of that, thanks to Alphadraft. And remember to always play tournaments like IEM Cologne by the numbers.